There are search operations that search not for a person, but for reality itself. Our story begins with the search for a woman named Carla Vernell Lee. This name exists in digital space. It is woven from fragments of other people's tragedies. But the real mystery is not what happened to one woman, but how the stories of two different lives intertwine to create a digital ghost. Today, we'll find out why the search for Carla Vernell Lee has failed to produce a single significant piece of evidence in the case in her disappearance. Carla Vernell Lee's story is the anatomy of a ghost assembled from the echoes of other people's fates. A digital chimera that makes us question what is more real, a flesh and blood human being or his information, double living forever in the labyrinths of the web. This research begins where all maps and familiar routes end, in a space where echoes are louder than voices and shadows are cast, not by a person, but by a set of data stitched together by the cold logic of an algorithm. We used to think that the digital footprint was irrefutable proof of existence. But what if it could be proof of the opposite? What if it could create a simulation of life so convincing that it begins to demand its own investigation? Carla Lee's story doesn't begin with a cry for help or a missing persons report. It begins with silence, a deafening, ringing void in the databases where there should be records of birth, schooling, work. Her name appears suddenly, as if out of nowhere, already clothed in the mourning of rumor and speculation. Unlike ordinary unsolved cases, where there is a point of reference, the last day a person was seen alive, Carla has no such point. She emerges in the collective consciousness as already missing, as a long-solved mystery whose answer is simply lost. This initial uncertainty is the first anomaly of the case. It forces researchers to move in the opposite direction, not from life to disappearance, but from presumed disappearance to trying to prove that there was life at all. The searches are not being conducted in forests or abandoned buildings. They are conducted in the cold, sterile spaces of digital archives, where every mouse click is like a step in deep snow, unaware of human footprints. And the deeper the immersion, the stronger the feeling that the object being sought is not a person, but an idea, dangerous and infectious. It's like trying to catch fog with your hands. The harder you squeeze your fingers, the faster it dissipates, leaving only a feeling of wetness and cold. So who is Carla Vernell Lee, if we are to believe the image that has developed online? She comes across as a victim, the central figure of the classic American Gothic story. The details of her alleged life are scant and contradictory, varying from forum to forum, blog to blog. In one version, she's a young woman who escaped from a cult somewhere in the Midwest. In another, she's a single mother from Louisiana who abandoned her child and disappeared after a mysterious phone call. In the third, she's a quiet librarian from Oregon whose absence was only noticed months later when neighbors complained about the smell from her flat. Age, occupation, social status, all of these fundamental markers of identity are missing from Carla. She is defined not by what she was, but by what she has become. An enigma. Her story is a blank canvas on which anyone can paint their fears and assumptions. It is this emptiness that makes her so appealing. She becomes the perfect object for speculation, a vessel to be filled with the darkest theories. It disappeared because it never existed in the form in which it is sought. She is lost in the echo chambers of data, where algorithms ignorant of human emotion stitch together scraps of information to create monsters. She is a ghost born from the collective unconscious of the internet, a figure woven from fear of the unknown and a desire to find order in chaos. The context of this situation is unique. Usually a search operation involves professionals, rescuers, police, volunteers. The search for Carla Lee involves a faceless and anonymous crowd. It is an army of online detectives armed not with walkie-talkies and navigators, but with search engines, and access to open databases. They scour not squares of terrain, but terabytes of information, looking for coincidences, building theories that branch and multiply with each new comment. The hidden conflict in this case lies on the surface. It is a war between rumor and fact, between the collective belief in Carla's existence and the deafening silence of the official documents. Anyone trying to get to the truth faces this tension. On the one hand, dozens of websites confidently recounting her tragic fate. On the other, the complete absence of even a single official report, even a single newspaper clipping that would confirm that a woman with that name was indeed once missing. This creates an atmosphere of cognitive dissonance where reality itself seems malleable and unreliable. The search becomes like an archaeological dig, where under layers of speculation and fantasy, one must find at least one shard of genuine fact. But each new layer turns out to be as artificial as the previous one. At first glance, it looks like a standard unsolved case, one of thousands that are gathering dust on the shelves of the internet. There's a name. There's a story, albeit a vague one. There's a community of people united by an interest in the mystery. This external stability creates an illusion of security, a feeling that we are just facing a complex but quite solvable task. There seems to be only one element missing, one key witness or lost document that will connect the dots. This confidence is reinforced by the very language used to describe the case. Standard terms of the true crime genre are used. Cold case, mysterious disappearance, silent witnesses. All this creates a familiar narrative cocoon within which the viewer or reader feels comfortable. He knows the rules of the game. He expects clues, interrogations, reconstructions of events. This preparation, this immersion in a familiar atmosphere is a key element of drama, because the more confident we feel at the beginning, the greater the shock of facing the truth. Forum discussion threads grow to hundreds of pages. Users exchange facts that turn out to be mere retellings of other people's speculations. But in this collective buzz, the illusion of authenticity is born. The final link in this case, ironically, is not a message to loved ones or a phone call. It is the very fact that this story exists online. Numerous posts on forums, articles on websites dedicated to unsolved crimes, all serve as a kind of last contact. They confidently state, yes, Carla Vernell Lee existed. Yes, she is missing. This collective certainty acts as a sedative. It creates a false sense that the foundation of the story is solid. It seems that because so many people are talking about it, there must be something behind it. This illusion is reinforced by the details that swarm from one source to another, adding new details, creating the appearance of confirmed information. This certainty of relatives, which in this case is the internet community itself, prepares the ground for the main plot twist. It sets the stage for a drama in which, as it turns out later, the protagonist is missing. It's like preparing for an expedition to an uncharted land based on a map drawn from the stories of those who have never been there. The gear is ready, the route is set, the team is enthusiastic. No one suspects that the very land they are traveling to simply does not exist. In any search operation, there comes a moment when the fog of assumptions clears and the first distinct trail appears on the ground. This moment turns passive waiting into active action. In the Carla Vernell Lee case, this turning point comes not with the discovery of an abandoned car or a suicide note, but with the appearance of the first concrete, verifiable fact. The search, which until then had wandered in a maze of rumors, suddenly finds a fulcrum. That point, however, turns out to be much darker and colder than one might expect. The trail leads not to the story of a lost soul, but to the first, basic narrative set out in the dossier. It is a brutal, shockingly public crime that unfolds not in the shadows but under the merciless light of the screens, where violence becomes a spectacle. At the center of this narrative is a man named Earl Lee Johnson. According to the material, he is facing a life sentence for a murder, but not an ordinary murder, but one that was broadcast on social media. The platform for this horrific act was Facebook Live, turning a private act of violence into a public spectacle. This fact immediately shifts the focus from the simple question of what happened to deeper and more disturbing questions about motive, audience, and the role of technology in amplifying the horror. The choice to broadcast the murder live indicates a motive beyond the act itself. It is not just murder, it is performance art. The perpetrator generally seeks to conceal his or her actions. The person broadcasting the crime is looking for an audience. This event, this trigger, becomes the starting point that turns the amorphous legend of Carl Lee into something that can be studied under the microscope of forensic science. The details of the crime described in the dossier only emphasize its personal and violent nature. The victim reportedly suffered multiple stab wounds. This method of murder, unlike a gunshot from a distance, requires close proximity, physical contact, and force. It creates an eerie paradox with the digital distance provided by the live shot. There is a tension between two opposites. On the one hand, the primal tactile brutality, and on the other, the cold, detached nature of digital broadcasting, which turns real agony into a stream of pixels for an anonymous audience. The medium is not incidental here. It is central to the nature of crime and the psychology of the perpetrator. It is not just a way of documenting violence, but a way of turning it into an event, of making the world watch without being able to intervene. It is here, in this cold, clinical report, that the search encounters its first insoluble contradiction. It is a finding that does not fit into any of the versions, existing as an anomaly, as a logical failure in the system. It is not a strange object found at the scene of an accident, not a trail that mysteriously breaks off. It's something far more fundamental. It's the date. The case file states that jury selection has begun in the 19th Circuit Court. The trial itself, the document says, will begin on the 8th of September, 2025. That date, 2025, is the final irrefutable break in the reality of the case. It turns a potential piece of evidence into an insurmountable obstacle. A paradox arises that cannot be circumvented. A person cannot be the victim of a crime to be tried in the year 2025 and at the same time be reported missing for years, as rumors on the net suggest. This single fact irrefutably proves that the story of Carla's disappearance and the story of Earl Lee Johnson's crime cannot be connected as suggested. Tension is created by the collision of two opposing time streams. One flows from the past to the present, which is the legend of the disappearance. The other flows from the present to the future, a trial that has yet to take place. At the point where they intersect is Carla Vernell Lee, a figure who, as is now becoming clear, cannot belong to both worlds at the same time. It is like excavating an ancient city to find an artifact with a date from the future, a detail that not only does not fit into the painting, but destroys the canvas itself. The shock of this discovery is intellectual rather than emotional. It is not a scream of horror, but a quiet, cold stupor. The moment when the researcher, looking at the screen, realizes that the map he has been following is not just wrong, it describes a different reality. All previous theories, all forum threads, all speculation about Carla's connection to the case crumble in an instant. This feeling is akin to that of a mountaineer who, having climbed to the top, sees that it was only a false peak and the real mountain is miles away, behind an impassable gorge. The emotion here is restrained, professional, but no less strong because of that. It's the frustration of wasted time. It is the irritation of realizing that you have fallen victim to an information trap. There is silence, a silence in which only the hum of the system unit can be heard. At that moment, the whole operation is reassessed. If the main trail turned out to be a sham, what was the basis of the case in the first place? The belief in the existence of Carla Vernell Lee is cracked for the first time. Up to this point, it had been an axiom, a starting point. Now it becomes an object of doubt itself. This shock generates not panic, but a cold analytical rage, a desire to understand not so much what happened to Carla, but how this complex, multi-layered disinformation was constructed. It's a shift from being an investigator, following a trail, to being a deconstructionist, taking the mechanism of the illusion apart. Now the goal is not to find the man, but to understand how his shadow was created. There comes a point when it is necessary to formalize the loss. The first trail, so loud, so clear, and so promising, turns out to be an operational dead end. A deeper examination of Earl Lee Johnson's file reveals another critical detail. The sources provided do not give the name of his victim. It is hidden behind legal language, behind the anonymity required by procedure. The connection between this case and the disappearance of Carla Lee was built solely on one element, the coincidence of the surname. Lee. This word served as a semantic hook on which algorithms and human imagination strung two completely different stories, stitching them into a single monstrous fabric. This is the threshold of irreversibility. There is no going back to the old version. It becomes obvious that the mystery shifts from the question, what happened to Carla, to the question, how were the two stories wrongly connected? The search tactics must change dramatically. It is necessary to discard this signal, however strong, and start combing the area anew, in silence, away from the loud headlines of the crime news. It's not murder we need to look for, but just a name. This decision marks the failure of the original plan and a move to improvisation. The operation to find the missing man is officially over, having never begun. In its place, another operation, much more complex and confusing, begins. An operation to find the truth in a cracked digital mirror. After encountering an insurmountable wall of facts, the operation enters a new phase. The failure of the first, most obvious trace requires not just a change of route, but a complete reassessment of the nature of the search itself. It is a moment of adaptation. Instead of continuing to bang against the cold wall of the crime narrative, improvisation was necessary. If the loud public narrative of murder has proved a trap, perhaps the answer lies in its opposite, in silence and obscurity. The tactic changes from listening for loud echoes to trying to pick up barely audible whispers. The search moves away from the study of crime to the study of memory. It is a decision dictated by desperation, but based on cold logic. If the name Carl Lee was mistakenly attached to the Earl Lee Johnson case, then there must be a primary source somewhere. Another Carl Lee, whose digital footprint was inadvertently drawn into this vortex. This transition is akin to when a search party, having lost the trail on a rocky plateau, decides to descend into an overgrown gorge that was previously thought to be impassable. It is a risky maneuver that requires a completely different set of tools and skills. Instead of analyzing legal documents, it now requires patiently sifting through genealogy websites, obituary archives, and social media. It's painstaking, almost meditative work where attention to the smallest details, not quick results, is what matters. Improvisation involves abandoning the original goal to find the missing person and adopting a new one to find out how her legend was created. The search shifts from the question, where is it, to what is it made of? It's a fundamental shift that turns the investigation from criminal to almost philosophical. The protracted phase of the operation is underway. It is no longer a swift dash on the trail, but a slow, exhausting combing of the digital terrain. The hard life of this operation consists not of cold nights in tents, but of hours-long sessions in front of a monitor, where the only sound is the hum of the system unit and the clicks of the mouse. It's an immersion into a new reality, a world of digital graveyards that hold millions of stories, cut short and forgotten. Platforms like Legacy.com become the primary field of search. Every page, every obituary, is a potential lead or another dead end. The work becomes a routine, a methodical repetition of the same steps, typing the name Carl Lee into the search box, applying filters by date, by state, by keyword. It is the constant pressure of the elements, but the elements of information. Instead of wind and snow, there's information, noise, white noise of data that threatens to hide the detail you're looking for under an avalanche of irrelevant information. Hundreds, thousands of women with that name. Carla Lee, a teacher from Ohio who died in the 2000s. Carla Lee, a Vietnam veteran from Texas. Carla Lee, a teenager from California who died in a car crash. Each of them is a separate, complete story that has nothing to do with our ghost. The process is exhausting. It leaches out enthusiasm, leaving only mechanical persistence. It is like the work of a gold digger who washes tons of sand in the hope of finding a single grain. At some point, there's a psychological breakdown. The work hits a wall. Endless hours of searching bring nothing but fatigue and a growing sense of the absurdity of what is happening. Doubts about the very purpose of the operation become almost unbearable. What if there is no other Carla Lee? What if the name in the Earl Lee Johnson case is a mere coincidence, and the whole legend of Carla Vernell has been made up by someone from beginning to end, as an evil joke or a social experiment? The belief that this puzzle has a solution is beginning to wane. The feeling is akin to that of a person lost in a mirror maze, where each movement only creates new reflections, but does not bring one closer to the exit. This crisis is exacerbated by the very nature of digital search. Unlike in the physical world, where the absence of traces is information in itself, in the digital world, the absence of information is simply emptiness. It neither proves nor disproves anything. It only increases uncertainty. There's a sense of guilt, an irrational feeling that you are missing something, that the answer is right in front of your eyes, but you can't see it because of your own inattention or fatigue. This is the most dangerous moment in any protracted investigation. The moment when the investigator is ready to give up, admit defeat, and close the case, leaving the ghost to wander in his digital domain. It is at this moment, at the very bottom of despair, when the search seems absolutely pointless, that an inner break occurs. It happens not due to a brilliant insight, but due to simple persistence, a last, almost hopeless attempt to check one more combination of filters. And this time, among hundreds of faceless links, something different appears, a new point of reference. It's not a loud headline, not a screaming clue. It's a quiet, humble obituary page on the Legacy.com platform. The headline reads simply, Carla Lee, but the date beneath it makes the heart sink. The guestbook posts are dated from November 2013. This is the second key finding, the second narrative. If the first was cold and violent, the second turns out to be warm, mournful, and intimate. There is no word of violence here, no hint of crime. Instead, here is a portrait of a woman, painted in the words of those who loved her. Real names appear here, her husband Bruce Lee, and her daughter, Wendy Visconti. This discovery doesn't answer the ultimate question, but it changes it completely. It's no longer just a search for a ghost. It's the collision of two documented but completely incompatible realities. One, Carla Lee, is connected to a crime that will happen in the future. The other, Carla Lee, died in the past, surrounded by love. The operation gets a new, unexpected impetus. The goal now is not to find the missing person, but to understand how these two women, separated by death, time, and the very essence of their stories, could give birth to a third, non-existent double. Hope, in the usual sense of the word, had died the moment Early Johnson's trial date appeared on the monitor screen. The hope of finding a living, missing person had evaporated when faced with the cold paradox of time. But in its place was born another, more complex and almost academic hope, to find a single, coherent story that could explain all the contradictions. Now, with the discovery of a second narrative, the obituary of Carla Lee, who died in the year 2013, this last hope is fading. It becomes clear that there is no single story. There are only two shards, two realities that should never have come into contact, but somehow collided in the information space, giving rise to a phantom third image. The search operation that began with the goal of finding the man is nearing its conclusion, but no answers are found. Instead of clarity, there are only more mysteries. This is not just a lack of answers, but a fundamental collapse of the very idea that every mystery should have a logical, albeit tragic, ending. Here there is no finale, only the echo of two stories resonating in the void. This state can be compared to the ultimate exhaustion of a rescue team that has spent weeks in the mountains, combing the same square. Days of searching merge into one endless cycle of fact-checking, where each new mouse click is like stepping on an icy slope that brings neither relief nor results. Techniques, in this case analytical tools, are working at their best, but they cannot connect the unconnected. The resource that is faith in logical resolution is almost running out. Society, in the form of the very forums and blogs that gave birth to this legend, is tired of waiting. It continues to cling to the original, simpler and more dramatic version of the disappearance, ignoring the facts that don't fit the convenient plot. Officials, if they were in charge of the case, would insist on the simplest version, an accident or a data error. But this version does not explain the depth of the controversy and how exactly the legend was born. The feeling of incompleteness becomes almost physical. It's not just an open case, it's an open wound in the very fabric of reality, proving that things can exist in the digital world that are both real and utterly impossible. The denouement of this unusual operation does not bring relief. It is accompanied neither by grief for the body found, nor by the joy of having saved a life. The final outcome of the search is the cold, documentary act of uncovering the illusions itself. It is the moment when two irrefutable but mutually exclusive artifacts are laid on the table. The official conclusion of this investigation can be reduced to a table, a narrative split that demonstrates the existence of two distinct, non-overlapping universes, united only by the coincidence of a name. This is a partial clarification that only deepens the mystery. We have been able to reconstruct the chain of events, but not those concerning Carla Vernell Lee, but those leading up to her creation. The denouement is the shock of realizing that what we were looking for was not a person, but an error in the code of reality. It is the moment when the map turns out to be more important than the territory, because the territory we were looking for never existed. The first column in this summary table can be entitled Narrative A, Murder on Live TV. The name of the subject is not given. It is hidden behind legal language and procedural rules. The date of the event, the trial, which begins on the 8th of September in the year 2025, points into the future, into the realm of assumptions and expectations. The nature of the event, a brutal knife murder broadcast on Facebook Live, suggests modern technological horror. The key person here is the accused, Earl Lee Johnson. The emotional tone of this narrative is one of horror, violence, and cold, detached legal procedure. The second column is Narrative B, a life remembered. The subject's name here is Carla Lee. The date of the event, death on or before November 2013, is rooted in the past. The nature of the event is a peaceful death after suffering, as indicated by the words, free from pain. The key persons are the family, husband Bruce Lee and daughter Wendy Visconti. The emotional tone is one of grief, love, peace, and lucid memory. And there is a third ghostly column, phantom narrative, disappearance. Subject's name is Carla Vernell Lee. Date and nature of event unknown. Key persons are absent. Emotional tone, mystery, and uncertainty. This table is the final find. It's a map of two worlds and the ghost that was born on their border. Now that the operation has been completed and its results recorded, only the last stage remains. Reflection. The outcome of the investigation is obvious. The official version, the one that lives on the net, speaks of a mysterious disappearance. But the facts point to something else. They indicate that Carla Vernell Lee never existed. The mystery is thus finally shifting. The question is not what happened to Carla, but how this erroneous story was born. The genesis of this digital ghost can probably be broken down into 5 successive stages, 5 failures in the system that led to the creation of the legend. The first stage is keyword association, a search engine algorithm, devoid of human understanding of context, mechanically associates the common surname Lee with the word murder from the Earl Lee Johnson case. To the machine, it's not a tragedy. It's just 2 words that often appear together in the news reports. It is a cold, passionless act of logic, a digital synapse that connected 2 nodes of data without the slightest idea of their meaning. The second step is data collision. Once the first association is made, the algorithm continues its search, driven by its soulless logic, and finds a page on legacy.com dedicated to Carla Lee, another Lee that is associated with the word death. At this point, a catastrophic collision occurs. 2 streams of information, flowing in parallel and never intended to meet, merge at one point. It is similar to the way 2 trains traveling on different tracks suddenly find themselves on the same track due to the failure of the arrow, inevitably moving towards each other. The third stage is semantic failure. The algorithm is unable to recognize context. It cannot distinguish between violent death and death after illness. It doesn't understand the difference in dates separated by more than a decade. It mechanically conflates murder from one story with the name Carl Lee from another. The patronymic Vernell was likely added from another unrelated source, or is a complete error, an artifact arising from this digital synthesis process. The fourth stage is the mutation of the narrative. In this stage, a person intervenes in the process. The concept of disappearance appears as a common trope in the true crime genre, serving as a bridge between a known death and an unsolved crime. This creates a more mysterious and compelling, albeit false, story. People, when faced with this set of conflicting data, instinctively choose not the most boring explanation, data error, but the most intriguing one. Finally, the fifth stage is the information cascade. This new false narrative is picked up by content farms, forums, or social media, where it takes hold, grows fictionalized details, and is eventually discovered by the user who accepts it as established fact. This dossier is not about finding a missing person, but about finding the holistic truth in a split digital mirror. And the main open question that remains after the conclusion of the story is this: if one random algorithm error can produce a non-existent person whose disappearance will be investigated, how many more Such ghosts born out of interference are roaming the web, waiting to be found.